Why are we so fascinated by serial killers? For the West, serial killers are a cultural phenomenon. In the late 20th century, the United States was the quote-unquote serial killer capital of the world, with over 60% of the world's known serial killers. The fascination with the minds behind such horrific crimes has bled into our popular culture, and nowhere is this more evident than in our movies. For decades, stories of these murderers, both real and fictional, have graced the silver screen, showering us with their depravities and distant psychopathies. All of this has led me to ask, what about places outside of the West? In this case, what about Japan? Japan's crime system and level of public safety are famous. It's not uncommon for even children to traverse the city streets on their own, and of course there's their justice system's famously high conviction rate. Despite all of this, Japan has had its own share of serial killers, so how does their cinema choose to reflect them? This video will contain discussions of violence, murder, suicide, and sexual assault. If you're uncomfortable with such topics, this is your content warning. As well, there will be spoilers for the films discussed. In Western media, it's not uncommon for fictional serial killers to be personifications of evil, murdering without a clear justification, while others are opportunistic, taking advantage of a life that has seemingly afforded them the absence of consequences.
More like amazement, when I think about all the things I've done in my life, without it in any way resulting in punishment.
My punishment continues to elude me, and I gain no deeper knowledge of myself.
This same portrayal is comparatively rare in Japanese cinema. Even films which seem to build this narrative tend to deconstruct it before the story's end. In fact, the only character that really comes to mind is Kiriyama, a side antagonist in Battle Royale. Instead, Japan seems to value the human aspect of crimes committed by serial killers, this being a common element regardless of whether the killer portrayed is fictional or inspired by a real criminal. An apt depiction of this comes in Shohei Imamura's Vengeance is Mine, derived from the real-life crimes of Akira Nishiguchi. Nishiguchi was himself an opportunistic killer, swindling his victims out of money and killing them afterwards. His crimes led to a nationwide manhunt, eventually leading to a reform of Japan's high-profile criminal system. All this for paltry sums. His crimes netted him only a few $100s per victim. Vengeance is Mine draws attention to this senselessness, using superimpositions to describe crimes and the money received from them. In the film, Nishiguchi is adapted as Iwao Enokizu. Like American serial killers such as Ted Bundy, Enokizu is portrayed as charming and exceedingly charismatic, capable of easily befriending his targets, ranging from a daughter and mother pair running an inn to an elderly man living out his last. Unlike American portrayals, Enokizu's kills are sloppy, not in the planning but in the act itself. The film draws out a violence that is realistic in its awkwardness. Rather than a series of stylized kills, Enokizu's murders are sporadic. The film begins with Enokizu's first murders, two truck drivers he befriended on his travels. He gets one of them drunk and bashes him with a hammer. The struggle is short, but real. Afterwards, when he needs to wash away the blood, Enokizu simply pisses on his own hands. The kills aren't glamorous, but at the same time could barely be called depraved. They come off as simply another act in a life of many, blurring the line the audience likely draws between their own psyche and that of a mad serial murderer. The time spent between kills is equal parts salacious and banal. For example, Enokizu spends part of his early adulthood in prison for fraud. During that time, his wife found comfort in another until his release. Enokizu's relationship with his wife, and more notably with his father, take up the bulk of the early story. The time between the murder of the truck drivers and Enokizu's next, that of the man his wife slept with, lasts so long that an audience member might actually forget Enokizu is a serial killer, at least for a time. Enokizu's crime spree, lasting a total of 78 days, is always fated to come to an end. The film's very first scene is that of Enokizu's capture at the hands of police. It's through this implication that an audience member may come to think that a game of cat and mouse is afoot, that Enokizu will employ a series of clever schemes to evade capture as we follow a nationwide manhunt. This could not be further from the truth. Enokizu's face is widespread, sure, his wanted poster ever present, even appearing before movie theater showings.
この男は元運転手榎木巖37歳です。強盗殺人事件の容疑者として全国指名手配を受けており、現在なお逃走中です。
Nonetheless, Enukizu spends most of his time living quietly in an inn alongside a woman who falls for him. When he is eventually captured, it is due to his identification at the hands of a prostitute who frequently had customers at that same inn. The police are effectively worthless. This is perhaps the only time the film spices up the life led by the real-world Nishiguchi. In truth, Nishiguchi was captured by police due to the report of an 11-year-old girl who happened to recognize him from his wanted poster, a decidedly more pathetic end than the film portrays. In my view, the most impactful part of the film is its final scene, but I'd like to provide more context on Japan's portrayal of serial killers before I address it. What should be kept in mind is the banality of the serial killer. Outside of the humdrum homicides, life goes on, just as it would for anyone. This banality of a serial killer's life between murders was depicted even earlier, in the 1966 film Violence at Noon. This film, directed by Nagisa Oshima, follows the victims of a fictional serial killer who has come to be known as the High Noon Killer. The audience, of course, knows his identity from the outset. The film opens on a rape and murder committed by the High Noon Killer, a man named Eisuke. This act is precipitated by a meeting between Eisuke and the victim's housemaid, Shino. The history that Eisuke and Shino share is a focal point of the story, giving a distant weight to Eisuke's crimes. Furthermore, Eisuke's crime spree is held in Shino's hand. She knows Eisuke is the killer, but begins a journey to track him down on her own rather than relying on the police. The film's narrative is primarily portrayed through various flashbacks to Shino's past, most notably to a double suicide she took part in with a man she was in love with. Both attempted to hang themselves, but Shino alone was saved by Eisuke, who was witness to the incident taking place. Eisuke cuts her down from the tree and rapes the unconscious Shino beneath her lover's swinging corpse. This was his first ever crime. What's most subversive isn't the film's content, but the domesticity of Eisuke outside of flashbacks. His strained and almost submissive relationship with his wife, who's also aware of his crimes, and his parasitic role as a drunken layabout. Again, the killer is not shown glamorously. He is not a bastion of evil nor a brilliant and calculated killer. He is a drunk who gets away with opportunistic rapes in a culture valuing spousal loyalty and silence. But Violence at Noon's most incisive look at the mind of a serial killer comes in a discussion between Shino and the villainous Eisuke. When Shino regained consciousness following the suicide attempt, she sees Eisuke and thanks him for saving her life. Soon after, she realizes what happened to her while she was unconscious, and, well, it plays out like this. This dehumanization of the corpse as a concept ironically humanizes the villain, removing him in entirety from the realm of blind evil. Director Nagisa Oshima has described Eisuke as a man driven by shame, in this case a sexual shame derived from being seen by others and made to perform, so his string of assaults begins by putting the woman as a concept into a position where she cannot see him. This falls in line with the popular and real conception that serial killers often come from troubled backgrounds, be it physically, emotionally, or psychologically.
If there's one thing I know, it's this. A mother should not scorn her own son. If a woman humiliates her little boy, he will become hostile and violent and debased. Period.
Being driven by some insecurity is a common diagnosis among real-life serial killers. For Japanese serial killers in particular, this is often derived from negative experiences in school. Again, this blurs the line between what we perceive as a normal human and someone capable of multiple murders. It's easy, in a sense, to be given a serial killer who is evil for its own sake, someone who is decidedly other. It's much harder to stomach a serial killer driven by the same insecurities that average people share. The Forest of Love is a story directed by Sion Sono, and it's as forthright with the lurid appeal of a serial killer as media can be. This comes across in the opening few seconds of the film's limited series adaptation. There's a certain style here, absent earlier films we discussed, something more glamorous. The Forest of Love is the most indulgent look at the whirlwind appeal that the serial killer holds. Indeed, the film is premised on a near meta-narrative of a group of filmmakers hoping to semi-biographically document the actions of noted murderer and conman Joe Murata. Murata is the most Bundy of Japan's cinematic serial killers. He is aggressively charming, managing to juggle a series of consensual sexual relationships alongside a handful of rapes. He is also based on a real killer, one Futoshi Matsunaga, famous for the Kita-Kyushu serial murder incident, whose crimes were so depraved the Japanese media were reluctant to give it detail. Like the films we've discussed, The Forest of Love spends ample time in the periods between murders, rarely focusing on the murders themselves. However, Murata's person demands that we remain invested, never allowing the narrative to lose its overt flair. Just watch how he dominates a scene. Here, Murata is being confronted on his targeted manipulation and abuse of a certain family, the Ozawas. As soon as everyone is seated, Murata immediately takes control of the entire situation, without missing a tonal step.
そう、いつこさん大丈夫だからね。きっと守る。緊張する。ああ、来たね。
ああ、よく来てくれたね。いらっしゃい、ありがとう。まあまあ座ってください。映画撮ってんだってね。すごいね。緊張しちゃう。Nice to meet you! 僕はね、こう見えてもね、CIA なんだよ。日本人名は固くならないんでね。村田ジョーって言います。暗号名はミス・キリっていう意味さ。この際ぶっちゃけていこうぜ。君たち、お名前は J です。J! おう。深見。深見。Yeah! You! Yeah! You! Yeah!美津子さんを解放してください。美津子さんを解放する。どういうこと?
This control of a scene allows Murata's manipulative abilities to extend beyond the story's diegetic walls, allowing the audience to feel some of the power Murata exerts on those who fall prey to him. Notably, The Forest of Love takes a close look at these victims, doing its absolute best to wring out their personhood and flaws so that Murata's manipulation can be equal parts understood and feared. There's an insidiousness that this type of character focus manages to convey, bringing out a dread in Murata's actions that would otherwise be absent, especially considering the sparsity of the story's violence early on. It also distances the story from Murata, something also done in regards to his killings. Murata often serves as a leader behind a killing rather than the hand committing it. His place in the narrative is less oblique antagonist and more a chaotic force of nature. Not a targeted one like the aforementioned personification of evil, but something more abstract. While Murata wields full control over each scene he's in, he's ultimately not in control of the narrative, despite literally assuming the role of director around halfway through. Murata is a mode through which other characters are allowed to free themselves to base desires and expressions. Many of the characters are connected through a school performance of Romeo and Juliet that involved a tragic accident, subsequent suicides, and permanent scars for the survivors. The trauma surrounding these characters takes up much of the story not directly involving Murata, but it's through him that each character's way of dealing with said traumas is given a near Faustian release, welcomed into the arms of a devil through whom they may pass their mental scars onto. It's quite fitting that the final line of dialogue is, This kind of narrative tone is also quite typical of Sono's most notable works, so I think this discussion would be best continued in another one of his films. Himizu, which is decidedly not like our earlier films. Himizu is a significantly more personal story of Sono's, directed in 2011. Himizu, when viewed in retrospect, depicts the creation of a serial killer, the young Sumida. Sumida comes from a poor family, made destitute in the wake of the March 11th earthquake. All his family has is a small boating shack serving as their home and their business. Sumida attends school, but his only friends are the homeless population living around his family's shack. His father abandoned the family some time before the story, only coming back to borrow money from Sumida and his mother. Early into the film's runtime, Sumida's mother abandons him as well, running off with her lover and never appearing again. Simultaneous to this, we are shown the story of Keiko Shizawa, a girl in Sumida's school who comes from considerably greater means. Her family is wealthy, but she suffers from the same parental neglect. A theme tying Sumida to Shizawa is their parents' abuse, and to a degree their outright hatred towards their children. Shizawa has long been obsessed with Sumida and serves as almost a manic pixie dream girl as Sumida's life spirals further downward. Shizawa is resolute in standing by his side and seems to be one of the few lights in his misery, though Sumida fights and rejects her closeness at every opportunity. Nonetheless, Sumida faces the onslaught of adversity with a stone-faced demeanor, with his innermost desire being nothing more than to become a respectable adult. Over time, Sumida finds himself the target of the local Yakuza. His father owes them a significant amount of money, and Sumida is attacked as a result. It is here where Sumida's journey towards darkness truly begins. Sumida's father comes around the boat shack and tells Sumida how much he hates him, constantly alluding to an event in Sumida's past where he nearly drowned, regretting that Sumida survived at all. He strikes Sumida, and this event proves to be a breaking point. Sumida takes a concrete block and beats his father over the head with it, killing him. This drives Sumida into despair and misery. He immediately regrets the murder and with it loses his last grip on life. After the murder, Sumida sees a man on TV, a man who had appeared at the boat shack earlier in the film. When he was at the boat shack, the man sensed some kind of bond with Sumida. He's on the TV now for a series of stabbings he says were inspired by his meeting with a kindred spirit. This breaks Sumida. He finds his life beyond repair, believing his goal of leading a normal and respectable life to be utterly beyond his reach. However, Sumida believes he can find some value in life by cleansing Japan of the low lives that he ascribes his parents to be a part of. He takes a kitchen knife, hides it in a shopping bag, and goes into the city. And this is where we truly see the conceit of Himizu, because Sumida doesn't kill. He wants to, he has opportunities to, he even fantasizes about visiting the Yakuza and killing several before being gunned down, but the film seemingly won't let him. Killing the Yakuza is actually Sumida's first goal. He goes all the way to their front of an office and knocks on the door, knife in hand. When he opens it, he learns that the debt that the Yakuza were hounding him for has been paid in full. The audience actually already knows this through a parallel story told earlier. One of Sumida's friends in the homeless community fell in with a pickpocket and managed to steal a large sum of cash in a job gone wrong. He puts all this money towards paying off Sumida's debt to the Yakuza, believing wholeheartedly in Sumida's future.
言ってみろ。どうしてガキのために持ってきたんだ。未来です。未来？俺は一回死んだ。あの津波で一回死んだ。でも住田さんは、住田ってガキには未来がある。これからの日本を託す男なんです。俺は口屋なんですが、あんたも俺もいつも誰死にするかわかんない日本の過去です。俺がこの金であの子に未来を託したいんだ。
When Sumida learns that he has effectively had the motive to murder stolen from him, he lashes out. He's actually upset with the man who paid the debt, yelling and screaming at him when he returns to the boat shack. When Sumida goes out again with a knife and bag, he finds another lowlife who's planning to stab a singer putting on a small street-side show. Sumida manages to intervene in the attack, but never actually stabs anyone, despite his full intention on doing so. When the opportunity presents itself, Sumida freezes and the moment passes. When Sumida is witness to a stabbing on a bus, he has all the reason in the world to enact violence and be a hero. But he doesn't. He can't. By all means, this seems to be the origin of a serial killer, the parental neglect, the broken upbringing, the accidental murder serving as a first step in the drive to make something of life through violence. And yet Sumida fails to go down this path. And this is in no small part because of the community. Though Sumida has fought against kindness shown towards him, he is beloved by Shizawa and the homeless community surrounding his shack. They've been close to him for a long time and genuinely want to help in his journey to being a proper adult. As mentioned, one of them pays off his Yakuza debts in full, but not every show of kindness is so grand. One of the most touching moments comes in the film's third act. After Sumida returns home having failed to commit a single murder, he finds Shizawa and the homeless community have spent the day renovating the boat shack, giving it a fresh coat of paint and a brand new sign. They have a small and intimate housewarming party, a pocket of love that Sumida has never let himself feel until now. It's only natural, of course, that this seems to come all too late. Sumida has full plans to kill himself, something that the audience knows through visions that have appeared sporadically throughout the film. He admits his patricide to Shizawa, who insists that she loves him all the same, but isn't going to be party to his downward spiral. In the end, she asks Sumida to turn himself in to the police, and after a series of highly emotional scenes, he eventually agrees. The film ends with his journey to the police station, all the while Shizawa telling him, "Don't give up." For a movie containing such a murderous subplot, the ending is optimistic, especially for a Sono film. Sumida has the psychoanalytical profile shared by many real-life serial killers, but he, almost through miracle, manages to persist. And it's on that note, beautiful as it may be, that I'll have to return us to the dark aspects of today's topic. For the final time, I bring up Sion Sono and his 2010 film Cold Fish. Unlike Himizu, Cold Fish is explicitly a serial killer story. It is loosely based on a pair of real-life killers, Gen Sakin and Hiroko Kazama, a pair of dog breeders who murdered several people in the Saitama dog lover murders. These two garnered great success in their dog breeding business and, again, were naturally charming. There was a drive, however, towards criminality. Sakin had Yakuza history, and his business practices were questionable to say the least. Nonetheless, Sakin saw himself as the perfect killer, holding to his personal quote-unquote murder philosophy, and a meticulous follow-through involving cutting down his victims' corpses to tiny pieces, burning their bones to ash, and eliminating virtually any evidence of his crimes, with his wife Hiroko helping him every step of the way. Cold Fish adapts these two into Yukio and Aiko Murata, no relation, a pair of tropical fish sellers with a similar pattern of murder. Cold Fish also more directly follows the inception of a serial killer through its protagonist, Nobuyuki Shimoto. Shimoto is a passive man, the archetype of the meek Japanese. He's a fish seller himself, but comparatively small time against Yukio Murata. Shimoto is unambitious and content with his small life shared with his wife and daughter. Of course, this doesn't pan out well. Shimoto's daughter, Mitsuko, is in a rebellious streak owing to her hatred of her stepmother, Shimoto's current wife. Mitsuko is caught shoplifting, and the family is dragged into the sphere of the Muratas. Mitsuko begins working at the Murata shop as penance for her shoplifting. She comes to enjoy life there as she's able to be away from her parents. At the same time, Shimoto is inadvertently made accomplice to Yukio and Aiko's latest murder of a business associate. Over time, he is forced more and more into their killing spree, with Yukio constantly abusing Shimoto, hoping to mold him into a protege of sorts. By the film's end, this plays out exactly as one would expect. Shimoto is broken down by the Muratas until he becomes capable of murder and naturally turns this on the Muratas themselves, killing Yukio and having Aiko dispose of his corpse and then killing her as well. Unlike the Muratas, Shimoto does not share a drive to be the gold medalist of murder. He simply sees his life as lost to him. In the film's closing moments, he kills his wife and then himself, hoping that the daughter who hated him would find happiness in a world without monsters. The narrative through-line shared with Himizu is evident, though much more explicit this time around. Of course, Shimoto's molding turns him into more of a spree killer than a serial one, but he adapts the means and methodology all the same. His murderous mentor, Yukio Murata, seems at first to be the embodiment of the archetype I laid out earlier about the personification of evil who kills seemingly without reason, but as Shimoto is dragged further into Yukio's grasp, we learn this isn't at all the case. Yukio's motive is financial. He kills people who owe him money. The thing that sets him apart is that he happens to enjoy the process of killing, and even more so, the process of making a body disappear. He's also broken. The film eventually reveals his trauma at the hand of his father, and when Yukio eventually dies at the film's end, he sees Shimoto as his father, enacting abuse on him once again.
お父さんやめて。もうやめて。お母さん、早く助けて。助けて。
The violence is cyclical, it always is. This is in stark contrast to Himizu's origin story, which shows the breaking of that cycle through love and community. Cold Fish is, well, cold. Its cast is almost entirely made of villains, and Shimoto has no one truly supporting him, from his adulterous wife to his hateful daughter to the murderous Muratas and their lecherous lawyer. By the end, it's only natural that Shimoto take on the same violent persona Yukio had been displaying all film, and when it comes to the filmic aspects of Cold Fish, there's that return to the examination of the life between murders. Unlike the banality of Vengeance is Mine or Violence at Noon, Cold Fish takes a bombastic and gleeful approach through the show-stealing Yukio Murata. Murata is not just charismatic, he is loud, he is generous, he is larger than life, grandiose in a way that contrasts incredibly well with Shimoto's initial passivity. The cost of this, narratively, is Aiko Murata. While she is an active participant in the murders, her story is one of what has been called a danger slut. She is passed from man to man, the obedient Igor to whoever happens to be calling the shots during a murder. At first this is towards Yukio, her husband, but when Shimoto kills Yukio, she falls for him just as deeply. Even when Shimoto bashes her head in twice, she still wants nothing more than to sleep with him. There's a conversation to be had about how Sono depicts women in his films because it's rarely this surface level and often has a lot of interesting nuance, but that conversation is beyond the scope of this video. So instead we'll move on to our resolution. Our final film is unique among all we've discussed today. It's the 1997 film Cure, directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Unlike our previous stories, Cure doesn't follow a central serial killer, but an almost supernatural occurrence. Our lead is Detective Kenichi Takabe, as he investigates a series of murders wherein each victim is killed in the exact same manner, but the perpetrator differs every time. Each person responsible for a murder cuts the same X-shaped pattern into their victim's body, but all of them are people who would otherwise not seem capable of killing, indicating some kind of mastermind behind the whole case. Early on, this mastermind is suggested in the form of Mamiya, a man whom each killer had contact with shortly before their crime, though they all forget meeting Mamiya whenever questioned about it. Each of the killers are outwardly normal people, a schoolteacher, a police officer, a doctor, but each is directly responsible for a murder, and despite the strange circumstances driving them, these murders aren't completely without cause. The policeman shoots a junior officer whom he expresses he had a strong disliking for. The doctor is a misandrist, driven by a troubled relationship with male society. Cure uses its supernatural antagonist, a catalyst for pushing the everyday man across the precipice, into a means of not distancing us from the killer, but identifying us even closer with them. As Detective Takabe draws closer to Mamiya, he learns about Mamiya's study of hypnotism and works on the theory that Mamiya is using that to induce each murder. This then becomes the test. If the previous killers were normal people capable of succumbing to violence through hypnosis, would Takabe, or any individual in the audience, be capable of resisting such light prodding? Would their personal strength and values be enough to resist the temptation of extremes? This is given further credence in the film. Mamiya's influence reaches Takabe's friend, the psychologist Sakuma, but Sakuma avoids committing murder by taking his own life. This allegorical clash screams for resolution in the film's climax, where Takabe has found himself at his lowest, but has also successfully tracked down Mamiya. Alone in an abandoned warehouse, Mamiya takes his seat and begins what appears to be a monologue. It's almost shocking when Takabe, in an act of cinematic subversion, shoots him dead after only a few words. But Takabe's mental fortitude has decayed over the course of the film. By this climax, it's unclear how much of this is genuine and how much is due to Mamiya's hypnotic influence finally reaching our protagonist. But the ambiguity of Takabe's actions at the film's end is part of its thematic message. To quote Jack Gordon's fantastic video on the film, ultimately it does not matter what he does, but why he might. The aspects of the film that led Takabe to this point in the struggle he, along with each of the killers, had to face in response to this metaphorical influence are the bigger question than the literal what if. And to touch on the filmmaking, it's lethargic, with long takes scrutinizing every action, and at times the film itself is mesmerizing in its simple repetitions, affecting some kind of hypnosis akin to what the plot revolves around. It invites the audience to meditate on its themes, on the division between normalcy and violence, base drive and personal strength, to question at what point someone could be dismissed as insane, how the separation between us and the other is narrower than we think. I'll return now to the end of Vengeance is Mine. I told you the final scene of this film is its most impactful. Narratively, it comes after the killer, Enokizu, has been captured, tried, and executed. His father and wife hold his ashes and move to dispose of them atop a mountain. They throw the ashes to the wind, and something absurd happens. The ashes freeze in place. This is diegetic. Both characters react to this as a notably strange occurrence. They throw more ashes, and these do the same, lingering in the air, refusing to return to the earth. Enokizu lingers, for his individual execution was not the end of everything he represents, or the kind of background and environment that creates a person like him. It's easy to ascribe blame to individuals, especially in such emotional matters as interpersonal violence, but these people do not come from nowhere. They come from the same societies and cultures we ourselves come from, and the dismissal of madness isn't something to be so easily entertained, and by doing so we distance ourselves from conversations and reflections on our own personal values. I hope if you take the time to watch these films, you're able to come away with your own interpretations, and can see how Japan's unique depictions of this cultural curio pique your own critical imagination. I'd encourage you to do so. Each of these films have their own strengths that definitely make them worthy of a watch. And if you know of a Japanese serial killer story that I missed, let me know in the comments. Bye! Also, by coincidence, I swear, Den Den is in 4 of these movies. This man does not miss.